Hi everyone, welcome back to Rabbi's Reflections. I'm glad that you're joining with me today. We'll be continuing in our reading of Kitchen Table Wisdom by Dr. Rachel Naomi Remen, and today reading the story No Statute of Limitations. Stay with us as we read through the story and then offer some reflections. Yitzhak was a survivor. Liberated from a concentration camp in 1945, he had come to America, worked and studied hard, and was now a respected research physicist. His first words endeared him to me. His Slavic accent reminded me of some of the older people in my own family. 2 years before, he had been diagnosed with cancer. Now he had come to our retreat for people with cancer to see if he could engage and possibly defeat this enemy with the power of his mind, the aspect of his being he trusted most profoundly. At Commonweal, we touch people a great deal more than was his custom. Disconcerted at first, he would ask, "What is all this huggy? What is this loof the strangers? What is this?" But he let us hug him anyways. After a while, he began to hug us back. The Commonweal retreats last for a week. By the fourth day, the inner silence, which has been slowly generated by the daily yoga practice, has become very deep, and spontaneous insights often arise. Sometimes this silence allows people to find their own truth for the first time. On the fourth day, in the meditation which begins the morning session, Yitzhak had an experience. It seemed to him that through his closed lids he could see a deep pinkish light, very beautiful and tender. Startled, he realized this light surrounded him and came in some mysterious fashion from his chest. When he told us about it later, he said it was like being inside of a big rose, very touching, because his last name means little rose in Polish. In the moment, however, he became frightened. He was aware that the light had a direction. It was pouring out of his chest like a big hemorrhage. It seemed to be coming from his heart, and it made him feel vulnerable. Yitzhak had survived the concentration camps. For many years he had lived, as it were, in a world of strangers. A deeply loving person, since his experience as a boy, he had been very cautious with respect to his heart, loving only close people, only family. This way of living had helped him feel safer, had worked for him until now, but there is often fear behind such a wary lifestyle, and now for the first time he had begun to feel some of this. It was uncomfortable for him. The retreat staff dealt with his discomfort in the way they deal with everything else. They did not try to fix it, to explain away his experience, or to interpret it for him. Instead, they listened with interest and continued to support him as he tried to work out its meaning for himself. Over the next few days, he seemed to relax more, to become more open. Sunday, in the last session of the retreat, I tried to tie up the loose ends. I knew Yitzhak had been troubled by his experience, so I asked him how things were. He laughed. "Better," he said, and began to tell us of a walk he had taken on the beach the day before. In his mind, he had talked to God, asking God what all this was all about, and had received comfort. Touched, I asked him what God had to say. He laughed again. "Ah, Rachel," I say to him, "God, is it okay to love strangers?" And God says, "Yitzhak, what is the strangers? You make strangers. I don't make strangers." There is no statute of limitations on healing. 40 years ago, because of his life experiences, Yitzhak had closed his heart, the same way Anna had as an orphan in Vietnam. Now, as he sought a way to heal his body, he had begun to heal in other ways as well. In the struggle to survive our wounds, we may adapt a strategy of living which gets us through. Life-threatening illness may cause us to re-examine the very premises on which we have based our lives, perhaps freeing ourselves to live more fully for the first time. What a beautiful and touching story that we read this week. I think so many of us, or I hope so many of us, can relate to this story. There are ways that we live our life, do things that make us comfortable, or just the things that we're accustomed to. But then sometimes something happens, perhaps a tragic illness, as in this case, or something that forces us to reconsider the way that we've been living our life. and recognize that there's another way of living life, that there's something that we can change in our behavior or our attitude that can bring us tremendous blessing, even if it might feel really scary at first. So Yitzhak is a survivor of the Holocaust. And not surprisingly, because of his awful experience in surviving the Holocaust, he's afraid of others. He doesn't want to open himself up to trust others. As he says, kind of, tongue-in-cheek to Dr. Remen, to love the strangers, to love strangers. Why is everybody hugging here at this conference that they're running, at this retreat, this workshop? He's not used to that kind of thing, and he's hesitant of it. But then over time, over that kind of week of the workshop, or the training, whatever they call it, he opens up a little bit, and he realizes that he can do that he can love the stranger. Really so beautiful, that line that he tells to the group at the end of the session. When Dr. Remen asks what's changed for him, he says that he had a conversation with God. And God says to him, "You make strangers. I don't make strangers," right? And Yitzchak has this profound transformation where he realizes it's his own perspective that makes someone a stranger. And that made sense for him. That made sense for him for many, many years. As someone who grew up in a really terrible and awful circumstance, he couldn't trust strangers. Strangers are people that sadly have killed and tortured his loved ones and family members and people in his community. So how could he change that? How could he change that? Rightfully so. But with a really awful and terrible illness, it's forced him to re-examine his perspective on life. And he can free himself to live his life, as Dr. Remen says, to free himself to live his life fully. So I really hope for us that we can somehow come to these insights. Dr. Remen talked about how this retreat, that's the word, retreat, that's what I was looking for, how this retreat offers times for silence. And I hope that while you're watching this, or after you watch this, you take a moment of silence, perhaps in your day today or at some point in the week, and see if some type of insight comes up. Just sit still and be quiet, be silent, and see what might come up, what thoughts or feelings might come up. And begin to have a conversation with yourself, perhaps with God, about what's going on, about what is currently challenging you, and perhaps an insight will come about. And I think what this story tells us, in its title of No Statute of Limitations, is that it's never too late. It's never too late to reform, to change, to live our lives as best as we can. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed today, and I look forward to seeing you too. Be well.